Why does it keep breathing? The alien scientist's voice, devoid of inflection, sliced through the sterile air of the interrogation chamber aboard the Clearathon. Its elongated head tilted as it stared through bulbous black eyes at the human slumped on the metal chair. By all calculations, it should have ceased functioning hours ago. "Because I hate losing," grunted Sergeant Jack Reynolds, spitting a thin line of blood onto the pristine floor. His wrists were bound to the chair's armrests with some kind of shimmering restraints, but his posture straight-backed and defiant made him look more like a man waiting for bad coffee at a diner than a prisoner of war. Commander Virek, the alien overseeing the interrogation, folded its forearms across its torso. Its skin, a shade of iridescent blue, rippled faintly under the harsh lighting. "Humans cling to existence like parasites to a dying host," it remarked with faint disgust, its head swiveling toward the scientist. "A baffling inefficiency." The scientist, identified only as Dr. Nitrile, nodded in agreement. "Indeed, their survival instincts are primitive, biologically costly. Our species evolved past such wastefulness eons ago." Jack snorted as much as his cracked ribs would allow. "Guess that's why you guys don't bother learning how to fight dirty," he grinned through blood-streaked teeth. And for a fleeting second, the humans watching from their cramped cells down the hall couldn't help but smile too. Virek's gaze snapped back to Jack, its black eyes narrowing. "Your humor is as illogical as your stubbornness, Sergeant Reynolds. Do you honestly believe your resilience serves any purpose against us?" It gestured toward a panel on the wall, and a holo display flickered to life, showing a rotating 3D image of a human brain. "Even now, we are dissecting your kind, testing your limits. What you perceive as strength is merely a biological quirk." Jack leaned forward slightly, his muscles straining against the restraints. "Funny you talk a lot about flaws for a bunch of people hiding their pasty blue hides behind machines." The insult drew a ripple of irritation through the room. Dr. Nitrile's translucent fingers tapped a series of buttons on the console before it. Primitive defiance. Typical. "Shall I demonstrate our biosynth reconstruction technology, Commander? Perhaps when this creature sees how antiquated its biology is, it will cease its bravado." Virek raised one of its hands, signaling for patience. Not yet. It turned back to Jack, studying him as if he were a particularly stubborn lab specimen. "Tell me, Sergeant, why do you persist? Your body is broken. Your chances of escape are negligible. And yet, you remain obstinate. Explain." Jack's eyes flicked quickly, almost imperceptibly, around the room. He clocked the positions of the guards, the layout of the consoles, the odd flicker in the ceiling panel that suggested a fault in the power grid. His face betrayed nothing as he replied, "It's not about me. It's about the people counting on me." "Something you wouldn't understand." He let the words hang there, knowing the aliens prided themselves on their detached pragmatism. If there was one thing they hated, it was being accused of ignorance. Virek's expression soured. "Altruism. Another inefficient human defect." Jack shrugged as best he could. "Call it what you want. It's why I'm still breathing, and it's why you'll never win." Dr. Nitrile's fingers paused briefly over the console, and its head turned to the commander. "Shall we proceed with the extraction, then? Prolonged engagement with such irrationality serves no purpose." "Agreed," Virek said coldly. It stepped closer to Jack, looming over him. "Your obstinacy has been amusing, Sergeant. But your biological limits will speak louder than your words." It raised one of its hands, and a device resembling a sleek, metallic syringe materialized from the floor. Jack's jaw clenched, but his face remained stoic. "You're going to regret this," he said evenly, staring directly into Virek's unblinking eyes. "Doubtful," the commander replied, lowering the device toward Jack's neck. The seizure hit fast and loud. A strangled gasp echoed from one of the other cells, followed by the unmistakable thud of a body collapsing. Jack's head jerked toward the noise, and he saw Private Dawson convulsing on the floor of his transparent holding pen. The guards stationed in the corridor, hulking creatures with segmented armor that glowed faintly, reacted instantly, moving toward Dawson's cell with their weapons raised. Jack didn't waste the distraction. The moment their attention shifted, he surged against his restraints with every ounce of strength he had left. The shimmering bonds crackled, protesting under the strain, but didn't give. His mind raced. Adapt. Improvise. Overcome. His eyes darted to the guard closest to him, a lithe creature whose bio-armor left its neck exposed. Moving with practiced precision, Jack feigned a slump, letting his body sag forward as though unconscious. The guard hesitated, leaning in to inspect him. That was all the opening Jack needed. With a sudden snap of his head, he drove his forehead into the alien's exposed throat. The guard stumbled backward, choking, and Jack pushed harder against the restraints. This time, the bonds splintered under the strain. The instant his arms were free, he launched himself at the guard, seizing the alien's elongated weapon, a sleek staff-like device that crackled with contained energy. Without hesitation, Jack jabbed the weapon into the creature's midsection, sending it sprawling with a crackling burst of blue light. The second guard turned, raising its weapon, but Jack was already moving. He swung the staff like a club, smashing it into the alien's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Jack followed through with a strike to the side of its head. The guard collapsed, twitching. Not bad for a biological quirk, Jack muttered under his breath, his chest heaving. But his victory was short-lived. A sudden sharp pain tore through his side, and he staggered, clutching at the wound. One of the guards had managed to fire a retaliatory shot before going down, and now a scorch mark bloomed across his ribs, searing with white-hot agony. Jack gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. Blood was pooling beneath his shirt, but he didn't have time to think about that. The corridor was chaos now, alarms blaring, lights flickering, and other prisoners shouting encouragement as Jack limped toward the exit. He could see Dawson through the haze, no longer convulsing but watching with wide, hopeful eyes. The kid's faint smirk told Jack everything he needed to know. The seizure had been a ruse, well executed and perfectly timed. He didn't make it far. Just as he rounded the corner, a force slammed into him from behind, knocking him to the floor. Jack rolled onto his back, weapon still clutched in his hand, only to find himself staring up at Commander Virek. The alien's gaze was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. Pathetic, Virek said, its voice dripping with disdain. It gestured, and Jack felt an invisible force pin him to the ground. He struggled against it, but his limbs wouldn't obey. You see now the futility of your actions, Sergeant Reynolds? You are nothing more than a primitive creature, flailing against inevitability. Jack growled through clenched teeth, his fingers tightening around the staff. You call this inevitability? Looks more like fear to me. Virek's head tilted, curiosity momentarily flickering across its features. Fear? Of what, exactly? So something you don't understand, Jack spat, his voice raw but defiant. You think this is stubbornness. It's survival. Something you've forgotten how to do. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment Virek hesitated. Behind the commander, Jack noticed one of the younger scientists, Relix. He thought the name was watching intently. The alien's wide, reflective eyes seemed to narrow slightly, as though it were processing something that didn't quite compute. Virek scoffed, breaking the silence. Survival? Your kind clings to life out of desperation, not purpose. You fight battles you cannot win, expend resources you cannot replenish. That is not survival. It is folly. Jack coughed, blood splattering onto the floor as he struggled to pull himself up. Funny thing about survival, he rasped. It's not about being the strongest, it's about enduring. Adapting. Finding a way. He grinned through the pain, locking eyes with Virek. And I always find a way. The response clearly annoyed the commander, who leaned closer, its voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. You persist in your delusions, Sergeant. But your defiance will end today, it gestured sharply, and Jack felt the invisible force tighten around him, forcing him back to the floor. He fought to stay conscious as the pressure mounted, his vision blurring at the edges. Somewhere in the haze, he caught a glimpse of Relix turning away from the scene, its movements hesitant, almost conflicted. An idea sparked in Jack's mind, faint but persistent. A crack in the armor. As darkness began to close in, he heard Virek's voice, distant but smug. This is precisely the futility we study, Sergeant. You know you cannot escape, yet you persist. Why? Jack's lips curled into a faint, bloodied smirk. Because you're wrong, he whispered, just as the world went black. Jack's consciousness flickered like a dying bulb. One moment he was certain the void had taken him, a weightless, endless darkness pressing against his mind. The next, pain surged back in waves, sharp and hot, grounding him in the brutal reality of his situation. His eyes cracked open to slivers of light, blurry and alien. Shapes moved in and out of focus, indistinct murmurs echoing around him. You are tampering with protocol, Rylix, came a cold, familiar voice. Virek. The bastard sounded just as smug as before. Jack couldn't see him clearly, but he didn't need to. The tone was enough. This is sentimentality, and sentimentality is inefficient. It is curiosity, another voice interjected. Jack recognized it as Rylix, the younger scientist whose hesitation he'd clocked earlier. Compared to Virek's clinical detachment, Rylix's tone carried an edge of something Jack couldn't immediately place. Frustration? Defiance? Either way, it was enough to keep Jack listening, even through the haze of pain threatening to drag him under again. Curiosity, Virek repeated, and Jack could practically feel the disdain dripping from the word. You waste resources on a doomed specimen. Its biological systems are failing. Extract the data we require and dispose of it. Perhaps Rylix countered, but consider this: humans are not merely surviving. They are enduring in ways that defy what we understand of adaptive biology. Their resilience may hold the key to overcoming our own stagnation. Jack's focus sharpened at that. Stagnation? Was that what this whole mess was about? Aliens with all their advanced tech and shiny ships trying to figure out why their species had hit a wall. He'd laugh if his lungs didn't feel like they were full of broken glass. Sentimental nonsense, Virek snapped, breaking Jack's train of thought. You anthropomorphize their actions, Rylix. They are animals, no different from the other primitive species we've cataloged. Their defiance is neither meaningful nor productive. And yet Rylix pressed, this one persists. Even now, I ask you, Virek, would a lesser species be capable of such tenacity? Jack managed a shallow breath, his lips twitching toward a smirk despite the blood crusted on them. He couldn't tell if Rylix was arguing out of genuine belief or just trying to provoke Virek. But either way, he saw an opportunity. And if there was one thing Jack Reynolds knew how to do, it was turn an opportunity into a weapon. Hey, Jack croaked, his voice barely audible. It felt like sandpaper scraping against his throat, but it was enough to get their attention. Both aliens turned toward him, their towering forms casting long shadows under the sterile lights. Still functional, Virek remarked, unimpressed. Fascinating. Jack ignored the jab and focused on Rylix instead. You want to understand us? He forced the words out, each one a Herculean effort. Then, watch what happens when you let someone like me try. Rylix tilted its head, studying Jack with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Elaborate. Jack exhaled slowly, gathering what little strength he had left. You're spinning your wheels, asking questions, poking and prodding. But if you really want answers, you let the rat run the maze. He coughed, red flecks sprang across his chin. You watch us. In action. Virek scoffed. This is absurd. It seeks to manipulate you, Rylix. Do not indulge its desperation. Desperation, Jack rasped, turning his head slightly to look at Virek. You think I'm desperate? No, I'm giving you a chance to prove you're not just scared of what you don't get. The accusation landed like a punch, and for a brief moment, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Jack could feel the tension, Rylix's curiosity battling Virek's disdain. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he didn't have many cards left to play. Enough, Virek finally said, stepping closer to Jack. You have already wasted too much time on this specimen, Rylix. Terminate it and move on. Rylix didn't move. Instead, it stared down at Jack, its expression unreadable. There is logic in observing the subject further, it said after a moment, its voice calm and measured. If his claims are genuine, we may uncover insights impossible to obtain through dissection alone. This is insubordination, Virek hissed, its voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You overstep your authority. And you underestimate the value of an unknown variable, Rylix countered, its tone sharper now. If you wish to report me for this decision, feel free. But I will not squander a potential breakthrough because of your aversion to risk. The two aliens locked eyes, or whatever the equivalent was, and for a moment Jack thought Virek might actually lash out. But then the commander straightened, its movements rigid with barely restrained anger. Do as you wish, Rylix, it said coldly. But do not expect my support when this experiment fails, and it will fail. With that, Virek turned and stalked out of the room, its heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Jack let out a shaky breath, relief mingling with the dull ache spreading through his body. Rylix crouched beside him, its reflective eyes scanning his face. You are fortunate, it said, its tone neutral but tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. I have stabilized your vitals, but your injuries are severe. Without further intervention, your survival is improbable. Jack smirked weakly. Improbables. My specialty. Relix tilted its head, seemingly intrigued. This concept of grit you mentioned earlier. Explain. Jack chuckled or tried to, but it came out as a wheeze. It's like running on fumes. When the tank's empty, but you keep going because stopping means losing, he paused, grimacing as pain flared through his side. It's not about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about refusing to quit, no matter how bad it gets. Relix regarded him silently for a moment, then stood. Fascinating, it said softly. Rest now, Sergeant Reynolds. You will need your strength. As the alien turned to leave, Jack called out after it, his voice barely a whisper. And Relix, thanks. Relix paused in the doorway, its back to Jack. Do not thank me yet, human, it said quietly. This is only the beginning. With that, it disappeared into the corridor, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and the faint flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd found an ally in the unlikeliest of places. The plan was madness. Jack knew it. The humans crammed in the dim holding cells knew it, and from the way Relix's elongated fingers twitched as it outlined the details, the alien scientist probably knew it too. But madness was all they had left. I will disable the energy grid controlling the security systems in this sector, Relix said, its voice calm but clipped, betraying its tension. This will allow you and the others to access the maintenance corridors leading to the escape pods. However, once the sabotage is detected, reinforcements will converge quickly. Your window of opportunity is brief. Jack leaned against the wall, trying to appear steady despite the fire in his side. Relix had done what it could to patch him up, but patch was the operative word. The wound still throbbed, and every movement sent sharp jolts of pain radiating through his ribs. He caught Dawson glancing at him nervously from the cell next door. You sure about this, Sarge? Dawson asked, his voice low but tight. You don't exactly look fit to lead a parade, let alone a prison break. Jack gave him a crooked smirk. I'll be fine, Dawson. Besides, it's not about looking good, it's about getting out. The other humans murmured in grim agreement. There were only 6 of them left, including Jack, all battered and bruised from whatever the aliens had done to them. But their eyes held the same glint of determination Jack had seen in countless foxholes and firefights. They weren't ready to die here. Not yet. Relix stepped closer, its reflective eyes scanning Jack's face. You are compromised, it said bluntly. Your injuries are my problem, Jack cut in. And I'll deal with them? You just make sure your part of the plan works. The alien hesitated, its expression unreadable. Finally, it nodded. Very well. I will initiate the diversion once I am in position. Be prepared to act immediately. As Relix slipped out of the holding area, Jack turned back to the others. All right, listen up. This isn't going to be pretty. We stick together, we move fast, and we don't stop for anything. Got it. There were nods all around, though the tension in the room was palpable. Dawson, ever the joker, tried to lighten the mood. So, what's the plan if we run into more of those 8-foot glow sticks with bad attitudes? Jack's smirk widened. Improvise. The response drew a few chuckles, and Jack felt a flicker of pride. Humor, even gallows humor, was a weapon. It kept them sharp, kept them human. And right now, that was their greatest strength. The lights flickered once, then again, before plunging the entire sector into darkness. A mechanical hum reverberated through the walls as the energy grid powered down. A second later, the locks on the cells disengaged with a sharp click. Relix had done its part. Go, Jack barked, stepping out of his cell and motioning for the others to follow. They moved quickly but cautiously, their bare feet silent against the cold metal floor. Jack led the way, grimacing with each step but refusing to falter. Pain was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. The maintenance corridors were a maze of narrow passageways, pipes, and dim emergency lights. Jack relied on Relix's hastily sketched map, etched into his memory, to guide them. Behind him, the others moved in tense silence, their breaths shallow and their eyes darting at every shadow. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something acrid that Jack couldn't place. As they turned a corner, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere ahead. Jack raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. A trio of alien guards rounded the bend, their bio-armor glowing faintly in the dim light. For a split second, both groups froze, staring at each other in mutual surprise. Jack acted first. He lunged forward, using the stolen staff weapon he'd taken earlier to sweep the legs out from under the nearest guard. The alien hit the ground hard, its weapon clattering out of reach. Before the others could react, Dawson and Private Kim were on them, using a combination of brute force and sheer desperation to subdue the towering figures. The fight was short but brutal. When it was over, the humans stood panting over the unconscious guards, their knuckles bruised and their faces grim. Jack wiped a smear of blood from his chin and motioned for them to keep moving. No time to celebrate. Let's go. The escape pods were just ahead, tucked into a recessed bay that glowed faintly with emergency lighting. Jack could feel his strength waning with each step, his vision blurring at the edges. The others noticed but said nothing, their silent determination matching his. As they reached the bay, the sound of an alarm pierced the air, shrill and relentless. Jack cursed under his breath. The sabotage had been discovered, and reinforcements would be on their way. They had minutes, maybe seconds, to act. Get in, Jack ordered, motioning toward the nearest pod. The humans scrambled inside, working quickly to secure the hatch and prep the launch sequence. Jack stayed outside, covering them with the staff weapon, its energy crackling faintly in his grasp. A shadow loomed at the far end of the corridor, and Virek emerged, flanked by a squad of heavily armored guards. The commander's black eyes locked onto Jack, its expression colder than ever. Feudal Virek said, its voice carrying easily over the chaos. Your escape is meaningless. You will only delay the inevitable. Jack squared his shoulders, ignoring the way his knees threatened to buckle. Funny. I was about to say the same thing to you. Virek's gaze narrowed, and it stepped closer, its movements deliberate. You persist in your delusions, Sergeant. Even now, on the brink of collapse, you cling to your misguided hope. Why? Jack met the alien's gaze, his voice steady despite the blood dripping from his lips. You've studied us, but you still don't get it. You think it's stubbornness, it's heart, and you can't replicate that. For a moment, Virek hesitated, its expression flickering with something Jack couldn't quite place. Doubt? Curiosity? It didn't matter. Jack raised the staff weapon, its energy flaring brightly, and aimed it directly at a junction box on the wall. With a primal yell, he fired, sending a cascade of sparks and debris raining down. The explosion blinded and disoriented the aliens, giving Jack just enough time to stagger into the pod. He collapsed onto the floor as Dawson slammed the hatch shut and initiated the launch sequence. The pod shuddered violently before breaking free, hurtling into the void of space. Jack's vision darkened as the others scrambled to stabilize him, their voices distant and muffled. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Earth, a pale blue dot growing closer by the second.